Let's get to our panel now. Political scientist Dr Raymond Miller, Auckland University, former Labour candidate Josie Pagani and political commentator Matthew Hooton. I'll get a quick comment from you all on the immigration before we move to this sort of fragmentation of the left, if you like. Matthew, quite a debate there with Corin around a number. I mean, it seems that they put this out there and that it got away on them to some extent, the policy of around immigration.
Yeah, I can't understand what their policy is now. They've said completely different things on different days. I think what happened is they had those terrible polls on TVNZ and on another TV network last weekend, and so then they decided to do something populist, which was to practice the politics of race, the politics of hate. And he went public on this issue, raised the issue. He said that our schools...
Didn't you suggest he should do it on national radio? I hear you on national radio.
Well, I sort of said, you know, if you're this bad in the polls, the politics of race is a good political option, setting aside the moral aspect. And so he goes public on this. He says, you know, that our hospitals and schools can't cope and that house prices are going up. And then they and he sort of hinted that there could be a target of 5,000 to 15,000 net. Now we're hearing that's wrong. Trevor Mallard tried to tidy things up and say we're only talking about work visas and family reunification. Now we're hearing family reunification is ruled out. I think it's a shambles and the Labour Party looks ridiculous.
Josie?
Yeah, I think the problem they've got is that they've got two messages. One is that we need high-skilled labourers, we need high-skilled workers to active upgrade of our economy. And on the other hand, they're saying, but too many migrants, they'll buy houses, so we're going to turn the tap off. And what they should be saying is, we'll look at immigration through an economic lens. You know, what does New Zealand need to grow? And if we need IT specialists and medical specialists and engineers, then for goodness sake, let's build them houses.
Well, what's the difference?
And let's get them in.
That's what the current policy is.
Yeah, and that's the problem.
And Raymond, there has been some pushback we have seen in the past week from traditional Labour voters, from migrant communities about this shambles about...
Yeah, well, unless you nail a policy like this down, you're opening it up to criticism. He's presented the Prime Minister with an ideal topic because it's a very emotional issue. And it looks like policy made on the hoof, and you should never be doing that, particularly so close to an election. So it really is, there are not many votes in it for him because he's always going to be gazumped by Winston Peters and his populist message. So one wonders why on earth he ever did it, because he's got a whole bunch of policies, as we've discussed, that already deal with this issue. He doesn't need to scare people who've got the family members and so on who want to come and live in New Zealand in this way.
And he calls on John Key to say what the absolute cap of migrant numbers should be, and then he's asked what Labour thinks the number should be, and he says, oh, I don't know. Well, hopeless.
Let's now talk about fragmentation, the fragmentation of the left that we have seen this week. Josie, I'm going to start with you. I read an email, you're describing it like an earthquake, and there's a low rumbling in the left. How significant is it?
I think it's quite significant. I mean, I think with the advent of the Internet Mana Party and the debate over Te Tai Tokoro and whether or not Labour should do a deal or not to get Hone through so that they can bring in some MPs and so on, is a real test for Labour. And they actually now have an opportunity to differentiate themselves from the multitude of parties on the left. And, you know, with Kelvin Davis, who's the Labour candidate up north, you know, they've got a candidate there who personifies Labour values. I mean, he's talked about, you know, he wants jobs up north, he wants opportunity through education, and he wants to stop men raping women. You know, this is a good, decent Labour man that they should stand behind and say, we stand behind Labour values.
I heard David Cullen say he is standing behind them.
Well, yes, but actually if he really means it, so the real test will come when the polls show that Internet Mana's gone up 2 or 3% or something. But if he really means that he's going to stand behind Labour values and a candidate like Kelvin, he should go into Parliament on Tuesday and offer to do a deal with the National Party and say, let's get rid of the coat-tailing legislation by lunchtime. And then nobody's going to play these games. And let's get rid of it for this election. If he really means it, he'll go to Parliament and he'll do that on Tuesday.
I think there's some constitutional issues with changing the electoral system under urgency
3 months before an election
through a deal between Labour and National. But I take the point.
But the coattailing was in the Law Commission. It was get rid of this.
Yeah,
You've
and
got a seat, you get the...
And in the end, there was a consultation process and there was no agreement across the parties.
The government put it in the bottom drawer.
National didn't do it, you see. And this is why, like, Labor could claim the moral high ground, take a principled position, say that they stand by Labor values, we don't need to do deals, vote for Labor values if you want, or vote for these
Well,
other
I think
guys.
he has to do that in a way, or something like what Josie is suggesting, because he's implicitly said that there's nothing wrong with what National is going to do in Epsom and O'Hara and probably in East Coast Bays, because he was asked, does he think that what's happening with the Internet Mana Party is unethical in some way? And he said, well, no more so than what National
So they're
does.
doing it so we can do
Yeah,
it too. Because this is a lot of the argument that Lila Hare, and we're talking to her shortly, has put out this week, that the right has grabbed the strategic advantage of MMP, so it's time for us to take it back. So if they're doing it, we'll do it too.
Yes, this form of gaming is an annoyance to many voters because they don't like to see these deals being done. Obviously, when National decided that they would not implement the policy recommended through the Electoral Commission process, people could see that they were worried about ACT and United Future and the Conservatives, all of whom are struggling well below 5%. Now we see a situation, of course, where potentially Labor could benefit. And there is a concern, I think, but I don't think John Key, I would be very surprised if John Key was prepared to go along with Labor on this particular issue, because I do think that he probably imagines that National will benefit from this disarray, as he will see it, on the left, and will be quite happy to see Green votes and Labor votes leaking towards the Mana Internet Party.
Which is, Josie, how confusing is it for voters? Because you've now got this plethora of parties sitting out to the left.
Yeah, it's interesting. And sitting here with Matthew, I realised that there's been 3 women who've been allowed to debate with his soliloquies on Radio New Zealand. And Lila Hare's one, Sue Bradford's another, and me. And in a sense, the 3 of us represent 3 strands on the left. And each strand has a legitimate voice and deserves, I think, some representation in Parliament. So I've got no problem with them doing that. You know, I mean, Lila represents a kind of purist, uncompromising left. Sue Bradford is a reactionary left.
Until this week.
Right,
yes,
right.
Exactly.
And I'm a sort of, I suppose, a social democratic Labor voice. But, you know, each has a role on the left and each has a right to...
Yes, but I mean, I'm just wondering how confusing it is for voters. I mean, is it, Matthew, time for Labor and the Greens to be putting up that united front? We saw the Greens, we saw Russel Norman, they tried to put it up, and the voters know, we'll vote, we get that block, that's what we get.
It takes, it makes it more difficult with New Zealand First to do that. Josie gets a lot of criticism from the left-wing hate blogs that criticise her for being sort of a middle way, centrist sort of person.
Incrementalist.
And has advocated that Labor should position itself more broadly in the centre compared with where David Cunliffe has been talking about. When you've got now a number of options on the extreme left for very left-wing or so-called principled voters to choose from, then I think the argument shifts even more in Josie's favour, that Labor, as the main left-wing party, can afford to start raiding some of National's territory.
That's the point,
leading into the election.
Because either Labor goes after the 50% that are voting National, or they fight over that 1 or 2% on the left that there's a heap of parties fighting for now. So it's actually, I think it's an opportunity for Labor.
Do you think, Raymond, we will see, I mean, under Cunliffe, Labor going back towards that centre ground push there by...
Well, inevitably he has to do that anyway, because the only way that he stands any chance of building on his 30% is by trying to claim votes off National. There's little to be gained from claiming votes off the Greens, New Zealand First. They have to build a kind of centre-left coalition after the election. Voters are concerned. I personally think, going back to your question, that there should be some accommodation made between Labor and the Greens this side of the election. The sniping over things like immigration does the parties no good, because people want stable and effective government. And if they see a kind of 5-headed monster appearing close to the election, they're going to say, are we going to get it out of the centre-left? Now, it's different for National, because they've already got that kind of record with ACT and United Future. But it's up to David Cunliffe to show, and Russel Norman, they can actually work together.
Very good panel. We will leave it there. Thank you.